So what you're looking at here is Apollo GraphQL docs or Apollo server. So over here you can see if they have created a mutation. So essentially what we'll be doing today is we'll be creating a sign up mutation, and the arguments that we'll have for the sign up mutation will be email, password, and the username. And essentially what we'll be returning for that mutation will be an error response. So basically if everything goes okay, we'll either say null, or if there is some error occurring, we'll say where essentially the error is occurring and what's the message for the error. And over here if you take a look, they have created an add book mutation with title and authors as the arguments, and book is their response. So here you can see the book response consists of title, author, and the name. So when you execute this command, what you're getting is the add book mutation with title, author, and the name. So essentially what we'll do is we'll be creating a sign up mutation, and what we'll return is the error response, or if everything goes okay, if the sign up goes smooth, what we'll return is a null. So what you have to do is over here, if you come back to user or resolvers, what we'll be creating is a mutation. So what we'll say is we'll decorate it by saying mutation, and we'll import this mutation. There seems to be some kind of type error. Let's restart TypeScript server. Okay. So what we'll essentially create is a sign up mutation. So we'll call it sign up. Make it async. The arguments that we have for sign up will be, as you've seen here, if you go back to type GraphQL, so you can specify the arguments for our resolvers. So over here, if we have arguments, we can say we have over here they say the title and the serving as their arguments for recipes. So essentially what we have is email, password, and username as our arguments. So we'll do that by saying @args. So essentially if you're using type GraphQL, you have to import arg as your decorator, but because we are using Nestjs, we have to import args as our decorator because they give us extra functionality, like for example we can pass in pipes and things like that for our decorators. So if you take a look in Nestjs documentation, you can essentially pass through pipes for our decorators. For example, a parse in pipe. You can do built-in pipes. For example, you can pass in parse in pipes and things like that in our argument decorators. So we have to import args from Nestjs GraphQL. So our argument name will be email, and we'll say email, and what it essentially is a string, so we'll say string for TypeScript. Let's copy this over, and we'll call the second thing as password, and this is also a string, and let's call the first thing as username. So there is a convenient way of writing all these inputs, because essentially what these are the inputs given by the users, so we can write it conveniently. Over here if you take a look in the type GraphQL resolvers, come down, you can see input types. So essentially what we are creating is an input type, so we can abstract these three arguments to an input type. So we can create an input type like this. So let's copy this over here, So what we'll do, we'll create a new folder called input. Over here I've already created a new folder called input. Now let's create a new file called signup input.ts. Let's paste that over, and so let's import the signup input. I think it's coming from type GraphQL. Even field is coming from type GraphQL. So what it partially implements is we can say our input partially implements an entity. So for example, what our input partially implementing is a user entity. It seems like I have a typo over here. So user entity, so we'll specify here is we are partially implementing a user entity. We'll call in user. I will import that here. Let's change this class name to signup input, and let's export this class as well. Export class signup input. So what you can see here, it's currently showing a type error because it doesn't really match with the properties, because our user entity doesn't have properties like title and description. So we can remove all this field, and so the things that we need is username, email, and let's copy the last thing we need is password, and these all are non-nullable. It's all our essential fields, so we should remove nullable as true. So right here you can see there's some kind of error happening, so let's go back and take a look in our user entity. Over here, see, as you can see, the error is because I specified password as number. Actually password should be string. So let's go back here. So our error has gone away. So that's the that's a good thing about using partially implements user entity, because if there's any types issue, we can understand it by TypeScript raising an issue. So let's remove this argument. Let's remove two arguments over here, and we'll say this is a signup input, and we'll say it's signup input, and it's coming from signup input. So what essentially we'll do is, rather than writing our signup resolvers over here, I seem to make a typo here, signup, and this resolver name should be user. Let's import user. Okay. So essentially what we'll do is, rather than creating our own calling our database from here or doing any database calls, we can abstract this away using a service. So to create a service, you can use the Nestjs CLI, giving us a command called nest generating a service. So let's change our directory to server and use that Nestjs CLI nest. So we'll generate a service, so S for service, or you can type in service, and what service we'll create is a user service. So we'll type in user, and let's say no spec for creating, so we don't want to create any test files for this. So if you take a look, a new service file has been created for us, and it will be also imported for us in providers. So it is one of the service created for us. And let's create a service function. So the function, it's a sign up function, so we'll say it's sign up. Let's make it async as well. And so the arguments that we take for the sign up function will be essentially the same as we have seen in the resolvers. So what you'll have is the sign up input. So let's do that by saying over here the argument is sign up input, and let's type it by saying sign up input. So essentially what we need to do over here is we need to call the database and check whether if the user exists first. So what we'll be doing is, as I said before, we are implementing a repository pattern. So we'll be doing dependency injection of our user repository. So to do that, in our user service, we'll call under constructor, we'll say private read only. So what this is a user repository, and it's coming from user repository. So essentially what we'll be doing is we have to check whether the user exists first before creating the user or signing up the user. So what we'll do is we'll say const user exists or not. So user exists is equal to this dot user repository dot these are the functions given to us if you're using type ORM. So you can use a convenient function called find one. So what we'll do, we'll say the where clause is where we'll say find one where if it matches the user's email. So we'll say sign up input dot email. So essentially it will give whether if find one where if it matches the email, it'll say yes, the user exists. So if there is no user, so if there is a user, what you have to say is, so that means we don't really have to sign up the user because the user exists. It'll be better for us to return. So we'll be returning an object. Let's make it object of arrays. So you can say path is email. So the error being created with the path is email, and the message we'll say it is invalid email or password. You can essentially say it's invalid email, but it's better to, for example, if any other unauthorized user is trying to understand whether a user exists in our website, it's better for us to say it's invalid email or password rather than saying invalid password or invalid email. So if the user exists, we need to return. So if the user doesn't exist, what you have to do is essentially we need to save the user's email and password to a database. So what we'll do is we'll use the help function called save in the user repo. So this dot user repo dot save, and we'll pass in the sign up input. Either we can do using the spread operator, or we can essentially say by saying email is sign up inputs dot email and username is sign up. You guys get it, right? So we need to essentially keep on saying username is sign up dot username and password is sign up dot password. So there's a better shortcut way to do this by actually spreading using the spread operator. I will just spread the sign up inputs over there. So we have essentially we need to await this because it's a database call, so it will take time, so we'll await this. So unless we get this value we can't go forth, so we'll also await this value. So after the sign up has been implemented, what we'll do is we'll return null. So in our user resolvers, what we need to do is we need to call this function that we have created in signup. So essentially what we have done here is dependency injection. So what we'll do is we'll do the same thing over here as well. So we'll dependency inject our user service. So constructed and private read only user service. It's coming from user service, and we'll return by saying this dot user service dot sign up, and we'll pass in the sign up input. See, essentially what we have done here is we either said we are returning null or we are returning an object, array of an object. So what we can do is we can say what we are returning over here. So we are returning a promise. We can say it's a promise because essentially we are creating an async function. So we'll say a promise of array of objects or null, and over here we can do the same by saying we're returning a promise or null. And essentially what we have done here is we are creating this path and message, or we are returning now. So what we have to specify in our mutations return is we have to say what we are returning. So basically what we are returning is an error response, so we need to create by saying the things that we are returning. So we need to say we are returning path and message is the error response, or else we have to say we are returning null. So let's create a new shared folder over here. Let's call it shared. I'm putting this error response under shared because I might use it in some other resolver as well. So let's call it error response.ts. So what we essentially need to do is we need to create an object type. So over here, if we take a look in types and fields, we are creating an error response. So let's create an object type for that. Because we are generating our STL, so we need to specify as an object type. So let's import this object type, and let's say the class name is error response, and the things that we have in our error responses, it's a field of path is string, and let's copy this. The other field is message. So let's export this error response. So over here we can import this, the thing that we are returning. We can say in our mutation we are returning an error response, so it will be an array of error response. Or we can also specify either we are returning an error response or either we are returning a null. So we can say here by saying null level is true. So we can change this object of arrays to error response. So we can say it by error response, and seems to create a type issue because we need to also say over here in our promise returning saying it's an error response. Go back here in our resolvers, our type issue has been solved. So let's start our server and check if our STL is being created for us. We have to see start our server by saying yon start dev, not production. Okay, seems to find a 0 errors. So if you take a look in our STL schema.graphql, so this is the STL created for us. So what we see here is essentially a sign up SIG. So I'm actually here you can see a typo that I've created. So sign up, and it has sign up input. So this is the input created for us. As I said, user email and password is the input, and it's gives us an error response. So error response is path and message, or else if there is no error response, it will return null for us. So let's clear this typo up over here in our user.resolver. Let's change this up. Sign up, and let's take a look in our localhost, in our playground, localhost 3000/GraphQL. So let's create a sign up mutation. So we'll do that by saying mutation sign up, and the sign up inputs. The inputs we have for sign up as username is, let's say, Sam. Email is sam@sam.com, and password is Sam, and the thing that we are returning is path and message. So let's press play over here. So if you take a look in the query error, you can see here it's trying to select where sam@sam.com. So it seems like to me it's trying to find where sam@sam.com. Essentially what we need to do is where the email is sam@sam.com. So I guess yes, there seems to be an error what I've defined here. So essentially what we need to do is we need to say where the clause is email, and we need to say sign up input.email. Okay, and also there seems to be an error over here in our dependency injection. So because we are injecting a repository, we can essentially say inject repository, and we'll be specifying what the repository name is. So let's go back and try to create the sam@sam.com user. Okay, now it says sign up is null. So essentially the user has been created, because if everything goes smooth, what we have done is we'll be returning null. So let's take a look in our database. So we'll be using PSQL and voting app. So let's select star from users. Okay, now it seems sam.com has been updated in our database. So that is it, guys, for our sign up mutation. So next we'll be creating our login mutation. and hopefully we'll see you then. Thank you guys for watching.